here in Montana. I haven't learned to pronounce it as Montana yet. I'm working on it. I'm going to start by, my title is there an ecofeminist standpoint on predation, eco-animal conflict, and nature-culture dualism? And I'm not going to be able to read all of this paper tonight, but I'll make a start on the first part. You can hear the second part on Saturday morning at 10:30. The first part of the paper is there an ecofeminist standpoint? Well, the obvious answer, I think, is if you mean by that a singular standpoint, one that we all share, the obvious answer is no. There's no singular unique standpoint, I think, that all ecofeminists share. I'm going to look at several possible standpoints, though. And this paper is an invitation to ecofeminists to articulate ourselves in flexible ways, as perhaps more productively divided on some of these issues than we have been. I'm going to argue for a plurality of ecofeminist approaches on these questions, which begins with the question of standpoint itself. And I'm going to take up, to start with, a point made some years ago to me by Deborah, one that she's not responsible for any of the results of this suggestion. It's a suggestion about standpoint, the importance of standpoint theory, which I didn't understand at the time, but I think after some years it's finally got through to me. Now, ecofeminism has employed, I think, a plural set of standpoint strategies. And I want to explore the way one of these, particularly, what I call the logic of colonisation, some call the logic of domination, can act as a standpoint or a group of standpoints. And I think that we need to articulate and evaluate standpoints. I think this is now a very important enterprise for feminists of all persuasions and many other positions as well. We can't treat all perspectives coming from all sources as of equal value, equal usefulness. We do need to theorise which of these kinds of social perspectives arising from different kinds of experiences might be the most useful in certain circumstances, and think about that. So we need to find ways to argue standpoint cases, and we have to hone that up, I think, as a general strategy. We can think about the claim to see something that others can't see. Your Honour, I was the only one in a position to see the victim knife the accused. So that's a standpoint argument. This is the kind of argument I'm going to talk about. Now, this is particularly important, I think, that we learn to argue standpoint cases now that the great monolith of truth lies splintered in 1,000 fragments in our feet, and we're judged by the ability to partner the subject of knowledge with the object of knowledge. Well, I want to clarify first how and why an ecofeminist standpoint is valuable and make some objections further down the line. I want to first of all make the point, though, that it's not a claim to a special privilege or authority. It's a claim to a different experiential base and a perspective that makes it possible to see things that can't be seen so easily from other perspectives. Now, feminist standpoint theory is not without its contestations. There's quite a bit of argument about it. I think there's something right about it. I also think there are potentially quite a lot of things wrong with it. But we can get a feel for what might be right about it, the fact that there has to be something right about it, when you consider the fact that it's very difficult to get an oppressor person to understand that he's or she is an oppressive person. It's much more difficult to get an oppressor to understand that what they're doing is an oppression than it is to get someone on the other side of that relationship, an oppressed person, to understand that they're oppressed. It seems as if people on different sides of this relationship really do see things completely differently a lot of the time. That what seems clear to an oppressed person as oppressive behaviour sometimes appears to a person from the oppressor category as just a recognition of difference or inferiority. It's just another kind of difference. And I think that what we mean then by standpoint may be coming to emerge from this. The idea that different groups of people with different life experiences leads to different kinds of perspectives that enable, again, different things to be grasped. So, feminist standpoint theory starts particularly from the contradiction or gap between women's lives and the way the dominant frameworks represent them in the case of feminism. Ecofeminism is a little bit different. I'll get around to that in a minute. Now, the idea that ecofeminism is a separate cultural activity comes in here. It's particularly important for ecofeminism to be to have at least some separate representation of women's voices. Inestra King, who is one of our great foremothers in ecofeminism, remarked that a separate standpoint, a separate cultural activity and political activity for women is worth having because, as she said, ecofeminists should hold out for a separate cultural and political activity so that they can imagine, theorise and envision from the vantage point of critical otherness. So she also went on to say that women's positioning with nature, traditionally, within nature, especially provides a critical ledge from which to view the artificial chasm male culture has placed between itself and nature. So the feminist standpoint is something, ecofeminist standpoint in this case, is something which can be lost when women perform their traditional roles as support workers in a male-headed or largely male-headed green movement within green organisations. That gets diluted and disappears very often. So I think that it's particularly relevant to questions about women's activism in the green movement, the question of feminism. Well, I want to now look at the question of plurality. I think there have been several standpoints that ecofeminists have made use of. One in particular has been discussed by Deborah, among other people, the closer to nature standpoint, the idea of nature feminism, identified with nature feminism, suggested by some forms of ecofeminism, particularly in the 70s. The idea of that position was that women's reproductive position, especially, was the basis of the standpoint in which women could see as nature or speak as nature. There are a number of problems in this that people have pointed out since. The main one, I think, is that such a standpoint would not be an achievement. It wouldn't be what Inestra King called critical otherness. It would be something that all women would have as a result of their reproductive position. So I think we do need to admit that a standpoint is a critical achievement and not just something that we would all have as a result of being positioned reproductively in nature. And of course, that's only one problem. There are lots of others. I mean, feminists have wanted to question that positioning within nature, particularly. The idea that they are actually correctly located within nature and not within culture. So there's a big problem about making that position consistent with a feminist position. So I think we don't want to keep women in nature. Does that mean we have to give up the possibility of a feminist standpoint? So that's one problem. What I want to explore instead tonight is the possibility of, as I said, the logic of colonisation that I and other theorists have worked upon, acting as the basis of a different kind of standpoint, a different kind of oppressed standpoint. The logic of colonisation, I'll put up that diagram there, I think there's some... The logic of colonisation is a way of hiding certain things. I'll explain how it works. It's a way of making them appear to be matters of natural inferiority and superiority. So in this diagram, you've got a very rough way of representing the progress towards this bottom from the first state up the top, which I take to be a state where we have two cases, considering two cases, a case of difference, basically. A case where difference is not very discernible on the left-hand side, but you can make it out if you really work at it, and a case where there is a natural difference of some kind. And we progressed through stage two to stage 3. In stage 2, these two kinds of beings we've got in the top diagram get sorted into two polarised groups. This is the stage of dualism, the construction of a dualistic field. And this is done by creating two homogenised classes, which are seen as very separate from one another. We can think of men and women as being constructed like this in the dominant traditional theory, traditional version of men and women, if you like. So, as Marilyn Fry says, it comes out, it makes it look as if men are very like other men, men on this side here, and very unlike women, and women are very like other women and very unlike men. So we get them sorted into two dualised classes. Now stage 3 is what I call it a centric field there, but we could see stage 3 as a hegemonic stage. In stage 3, can we move that up? Can you see that properly? I don't think you can see that one. That's it. Stage 3, the hegemonic stage. What happens in the hegemonic stage is that the second group, a oppressed group, as it were, gets to be background, made as background. We can think about this, a good way to think about this diagram is as an account of the Aristotelian theory of reproduction. The Aristotelian theory of reproduction is something I want to take as a metaphor for our current state in our recognition of nature. Now, many of you may not know what the Aristotelian theory of reproduction is. It was the theory by which Aristotle managed to convince himself and other Greek men of his time that men were the real creators of children, the real owners of the reproductive co-product, what we now see as a reproductive co-product, the child. And so we can see that this is what's come out in stage 3. In stage 3 here, men are foregrounded as reproductive agents. Women are backgrounded as reproductive agents. And can help us to understand how it can be that someone can come to think about a mutualistic activity as something that one person is the agent of. Aristotle thought that the father owned the child, the mother was merely a nurse. She only provided the matter, the man provided the form. This is the traditional theory here. So I think that we can also see this in parallel way as a diagram of the way we currently think about nature and culture. We think that we live in culture. We can take this to be culture. This is the dominant view, dominant party of this pair. This is nature. It's background. And it's inessential. The relationships of dependency have been hidden, just as they have in the Aristotelian theory of reproduction. So we come to a view that we live in culture. We don't live in nature at all. They live in nature, those other ones, the animals maybe. But not us, we live in culture. Well, the interesting thing about this diagram is that there's an entirely different way to see it, of course. You can see the lines, if I can just move it a tiny bit. I'm a bit of a techno class, as they say, around here. Just move it down so you can see. Thanks very much. Okay. The interesting thing another interesting thing about this diagram is that we can also understand it as a different way of looking at the same situation. So what we can see from one perspective as difference, non-hierarchical difference on the first line, the oppressor, probably the oppressor, sees like that, sees as a case of natural difference and natural inferiority. This is a way of naturalising inferiority. So it's a kind of duck rabbit, if you like. It's something you can see. It makes difference, something you can see in different ways. And from below, you can see, I think, the first line. From above, you can see only the third line. So line 3 is the only option from the oppressor's perspective. Now, this is because I think it naturalises a way of seeing difference. Now, note that one interesting thing to note about this is that in the process of trying to get back from the third line to the first line, it's possible to get stuck. Quite possible to get stuck. Happens a lot. And getting stuck is something that's happened to feminists, I think, when they've wanted to see a certain kind of equality as what they have to aim for. But it's also the idea that what we have to aim for is just to equalise these two separate spheres, for example, is an example of getting stuck. That's getting stuck in separate spheres in inequality, where difference is not critically deconstructed or is incompletely deconstructed. So its difference, of course, here is a homogenising and formative, oppositionally formative process. So, getting stuck, I want to suggest on the second part of my paper, I'm going to suggest that some animal defence theories have essentially gotten stuck at stage 2, the second stage here, where we humans have positioned ourselves outside the food chain in Western culture, and where we now want to enlarge this class by having some animals that we've learned to empathise with via the pet relation, those we call conscious animals, to indicate this, having some animals join us outside the food chain. So I think that's an example of getting stuck. And if I have time, I'll talk about that. I think the philosophy should help us understand these kinds of choices. So I hope that that's what I'll be able to do. Now, we can use this kind of understanding, I think, to understand several things. First of all, why it is that... Yes, turn this off. I think that the logic of colonisation explains why the coloniser doesn't see oppression for what it is. From underneath, you can get an understanding, I think, of the coloniser's conceptual framework and see it as a means of naturalising oppression. But to the extent that you can discern the same logic, that very same logic I described there, in other cases, then you have a capacity to get a standpoint of solidarity with them. So that requires a capacity, of course, to abstract from your own case. Now, I don't think abstraction is always the villain. So you have to abstract from your own case, in that case, to understand a common logical core. And you come to understand your own situation in other cases, as that of the oppressor. So you may be a woman, understanding that situation, come to see that the same logic works in the case of nature, for example. So in this case, what happens? The perspective from below sees how the perspective from above distorts the dominant framework, what the perspective from above doesn't see. So you have a way then of working out what the oppressor doesn't see as well as what they do see. So this also enables you to know something about what your dominant culture might not be able to see. Now, that's, I think, one of the very valuable things that women's standpoints can contribute in the green case. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But first of all, I want to say that using this standpoint logic, we can also understand why it is that we might be adopting a situation, a stance parallel to that of the human oppressor in the case of nature and animals. And that's also why we don't need what some theorists like Peacock Lee and John Rodman have demanded, that nature speak its own oppression in order that we understand it as oppressed, or understand ourselves as oppressors. We can apply the skeleton of this kind of framework to it without it being necessary that nature speak its own oppression, because we're moving in we're taking a different movement here from that of simple solidarity from beneath. cycling through the top, as it were. So solidarity can be based on our own human role as parallel to the oppressor role in other kinds of domination. So, of course, this doesn't just apply to nature, it also applies to it. It gives you a basis for solidarity with a number of other different kinds of oppression. But we can also use the standpoint, as I mentioned before, to problematise the limitations of perspective that result from the dominant perspective. How the view from above distorts the world. And particularly in the dualism of human and nature that the dominant framework continues to construct. Well, these limitations, I'll give you a little bit of an outline of how they work. Feminist standpoints, as Sandra Harding suggests, can often usefully start from the contradiction between women's lives and the dominant framework or master perspective, which manifests itself as the bifurcation and tension within women's consciousness that results from the way women are alienated from their own experience in the dominant conceptual scheme. For example, there's often a lack of fit between what women know to be true about how essential their work is and the way men see it. Men often see these things only from above, and when women have to see from below, they see things differently. They see their own work, looking after men and houses and children, in the local places where they exist, as freeing men for abstract labour. Now, when men look at the same situation, they usually don't see women's labour as important or even as work at all. It's background in terms of that diagram that I put up. Their rationality is such that they only see their culture, not what they count as nature, and they count women's work as nature, and they still do, including in the dominant economic perspective. Now, the same kind of gap that appears in the way standpoints based on male experience treat women's work also appears in the way the dominant rationality of the standpoint conceives the work of nature in supporting culture. The experiential gap between nature and culture corresponds exactly to the gap women experience when they look at men's views of their work, I suggest. And the logic of this gap means that there are a lot of things that we're unable to see from this standpoint, this dominant standpoint. So the gap may mean complacency, may mean we may not be able to see our own danger, for example. Because we as humans in the dominant culture only see from above, we don't see the work the other does to support us. So we in the dominant culture develop the idea that we live in culture, they live in nature, which I mentioned. What happens in nature doesn't really affect us. But we're wrong, of course. We live in both worlds. It's a kind of foundational delusion, a big one shared in our culture, to think that we live only in culture. We think this, of course, in just the same way that men think they live in an abstract world, not supported by women's work. So standpoint differences can help to explain why some of us have a greater sense of urgency about environmental problems than many of those around us, who only see them just as another kind of amenity or managerial problem. It's also why I think ecofeminism might have something especially important to contribute. Ecofeminists can see these as problems of denied dependency. They have a much keener experiential understanding, I think, often, over universal up there, of how essential what is denied might be. Because the crucial thing about being denied, of course, is that no provision will be made for your continuation. The Aristotelian father probably thought the nurse wasn't very important. Perhaps it didn't feed her properly, for instance. Certainly didn't get any slice of educational or social support. So mothers were just not important for the production of the child. So male environmental philosophers, I think, identified with perspectives from above, in my experience, rarely understand the denial features of our current problems. Although that's an absolutely crucial feature, I think, of the current framework. Now, there are very few good accounts in the non-feminist ecological literature of denial. But women, again, feminist theorists can bring to this a very sophisticated understanding of denial. I think what has to be explained is how something which is a participant in every aspect of our lives has come not to be seen. The structural means by which we represent what's a mutual creation as a single creation of ourselves, erasing nature's agency in collaboration along with our own relations of dependence, as in the same way as the Aristotelian farm. So what kind of special knowledge about denial is this that women and others seem to be able to claim, and what does that claim imply about privilege? Well, I want to say that it's not a claim to a special authority or infallibility, contrary to what critics of standpoint theory have sometimes suggested. It gives rise, I think, to a probability, not a certainty. It's a claim that has eventually, at least, to be delivered on by producing what would count as good knowledge and analysis. It's not a claim to know automatically in virtue of who one is. The good knowledge of the dynamics of denial, the experience of being denied, gives rise to, if it does, is an achievement that must be struggled for. No, I don't think that's the kind of claim that's involved in standpoint theory. It's rather a claim that it's important that women's voices, and those of others who can see in this way, be given fair representation and be heard, given more than the usual disrespect accorded them, in the interests of both equality and prudence. Since there's a likelihood some of them will have something important to say that would otherwise be missed, some of which we may not hear from others, very likely not to hear from others, ignoring them in the usual way would be more than usually foolhardy. There is good reason for us to be confident, I think, then of the value of eco-feminist voices and of women's environmental groups. And that's why it's so good to see that Women's Voices for the Earth is such a strong and vibrant group in this community. Let's hope that many more such groups arrive on the scene to make the voices of women heard on these issues in the future. I want to turn now to say something briefly in the time I have left about eco-feminist standpoints and eco-animal conflict. What I've said provides one way of supporting the idea of an eco-feminist standpoint. But even if we eco-feminists were to reach general agreement on that, even that wouldn't mean that we could expect to find anything like unity in the positions that the eco-feminists develop, especially in some of the more controversial areas. Significant disagreements among eco-feminists on these issues might then correspond to different standpoint choices. As we've seen, there are different possible standpoint choices available. Others would correspond to different accounts of a variety of issues, including, I think, particularly different understandings of the human position in culture-nature dualism, eco-animal conflict, and how to deconstruct culture-nature dualism. A question on which there are a number of major alternatives available to us. So, difference and disagreement among eco-feminists, ecologists and activists is not automatically a problem. But in the case I'm going to turn to discuss here, I think it has become a problem. I'm concerned about what appear to be growing incompatibilities between animal defence and ecological movements. At the level of theory especially, I think these differences are becoming extreme. When I came into this area in the early 70s, those two movements were much more unified than they are now. And I think there are a number of possible reasons for this. Theoretical purists working in incompatible intellectual frameworks, for example, science versus cultural studies, may be making the situation worse, the conflict situation worse. And of course there's vanguardism in both movements, caught up in the politics of individual virtue, out to demonstrate their own, rather than focusing mainly on making things better for animals, nature and people. Despite large numbers of recent theoretical interventions designed to deal with the problem, the split not only seems to me to be widening, but also becoming more bitter. I think it would be a real pity if we came to regard one another as our own worst enemies. We have much to gain from cross-fertilisation and many potential areas of collaboration. We have a fine example of this here in Montana, I think, in the activist group Buffalo Nations, which has been able to bring together animal defence, ecological and Indigenous concerns to oppose the continuing slaughter by this state of the last wild herds of buffalo on the pretext of brucellosis control. And I think that's a very good cause. Now, another important area that's missing our attention because of growing rifts between animal defence and ecological movements is factory farming. Joy Williams, in a recent article in Harper's, wrote, "The creatures that have been under our stewardship the longest, that have been codified by habit for our use, that have always suffered a special place in our regard, the farm animals, have never been as cruelly kept or confined or slaughtered in such numbers in all of history. The factory farm today is a crowded, stinking bedlam filled with suffering animals that are quite literally insane, sprayed with pesticides and fattened on a diet of growth stimulants, antibiotics and drugs." In Australia recently, we were able to make a start on the process of banning the factory farm by banning the battery egg. In 2 states now, we've managed to ban the battery egg. And I think that legislation shows the priorities and possibilities available here. We need to focus on the possibility of coalitions against factory farming, which represent, I think, the worst and largest scale systematic practices of abuse of animals and also of nature. And there are a number of possible participants to such a coalition. The possibility of coalitions with workers, for example, on wages, conditions, the widespread use of prison and indentured labour in both growing and especially in slaughtering facilities. Coalitions with consumers on health issues, for example, on the use of antibiotics, the prevalence of disease and intensive practices. That's been highlighted by recent findings on the very widespread salmonella and the potentially fatal organism Campylobacter in poultry products, and of course by VSE in British intensive agriculture, possibly more widely. So consumer coalition, the environment movement as a coalition partner on the massive water pollution and other acceptable ecological and neighbourhood consequences from intensive farms, for example. With farmers on the destruction of the small producer, developing alternatives to the evils of rationalist agriculture. With activists on neoliberalism, global trade, what we call in Australia economic rationalism, who look to establishing a beachhead for injecting some compassion, ethics and community empowerment into our economic lives for both humans and non-humans. And of course the animal defence movement. I think that we need to put more focus into opposing what must surely be the most extreme possible example of distortion and instrumentalisation of animal lives. Intensive farming practices that treat animals as no more than living meat or egg production units. I think this is much worse myself than the hunting issue, which I think is a vanguard issue, which takes up such a massive amount of argument energy. But no coalition has been articulated on this issue of factory farming. And although places like Australia show, outlawing factory farming is surely something that's possible. Maybe it's also possible to try and draw hunting groups into such a coalition to see if they can walk the talk of ethical animal practices and relationships. If we could work up the basis for a common position in rejecting the enslavement and ultra-instrumentalisation of animals involved in the factory farm, I think we would have the potential for a truly amazing and potentially world-shaking coalition. Well, that's the potential. At present, what we have appears to be a stalemate between the environment movement and the animal defence movement on these and other issues. Can ecofeminism help with that split and stalemate on that issue? Well, will it just reflect it? Will it just reflect the division? Well, I think it'll probably do both, but I think that articulating ecofeminist diversity on this issue may ultimately also be able to help reduce the stalemate by multiplying our options and theoretical models and give us a chance of finding some that come close to meeting. Let me say that I think there is room for some significant divisions in ecofeminist positions on issues of predation, eco-animal conflict and nature-culture dualism. In Esther King's classic statement, ecofeminism aims to harmonise nature and culture, long viewed in patriarchal culture as a sphere of irreconcilable opposition and hyper-separation. It aims to take advantage of the standpoint that can result from women's cultural placement as seen from both sides of the nature-culture duels. So I would suggest that not only is there no single ecofeminist standpoint on these issues, but we need to develop a fuller range of ecofeminist alternatives. There's not only room within King's framework for some very significant differences among ecofeminists on these issues, there's a real need for the development of plural ecofeminist standpoints that can help to theorise this conflict in multiple ways. So I want to suggest that that's particularly necessary because the eco-animal movement conflict has potential to tear apart any broad political alliance that includes both these movements and to continually deepen under intellectualist and vanguardist management so that we become our own worst enemies instead of potential collaborators. I think this is likely because in practice there's potentially, I think, no way to completely harmonise these focuses. They're different focuses in many ways, although they can be brought into greater agreement. I don't think they can ever be completely harmonised. So King's project of harmonising nature-culture dualism, I think it's an ambiguous project, and that's another reason why we need this plurality. For example, I think some eco-feminist positions have tended to follow through King's harmonising program in a somewhat culturally universalist and over-feminising way. For example, some feminist work on ethical eating, I think, has provided a brilliant analysis of our food practice as sites of domination, but in my view has failed to see the extent to which these practices are culturally specific. The analysis, I think, has failed to provide realistic alternatives that don't treat carnivorousness as a new form of original sin, or food as an inevitable site of domination. In aiming to pacify predation relationships universally, this position requires a stringent veganism, which is seen as absolute and universal in ways that I think are insensitive to ethnic, cultural and other kinds of difference. In aiming at dissolving nature-culture dualism and eco-animal conflict in ways that privilege the ethical standards of culture, I think. It's also insensitive to the ethical differences between nature and culture, in the cusp of which I think we must situate our food practices. Although it aims to break down human-animal dualism and recognise human-animal kinship, I've suggested that it does so in a way that extends to a group of higher animals the privileged position Western humans have taken up for themselves as outside the food chain. This leads ethical eating unwittingly towards a neo-Cartesian philosophical project which focuses on distinguishing what beings are inside and what are outside the scope of ethics, supposedly conscious from non-conscious life, and which denies the continuity of planetary life. I want to suggest an alternative approach. Harmonisation of nature and culture should remain central to ecofeminism to the extent that disharmony results from culture's construction of nature in terms of dualism, domination and denial. Nevertheless, I believe that there's a need to respect some elements and areas of irresolvable difference and tension between nature and culture, and so to abandon over-generalised projects of pacification and boundary disputes. We need to rule out more clearly forms of harmonisation based on the conquest of nature by culture. A true harmonisation would not require that we dissolve the nature-culture boundary. Undoing dualism requires undoing human-nature hyper-separation and acknowledging the overlap. But current forms of bioengineering illustrate only too clearly that not all breakdowns of the human-nature boundary can be constructed as liberatory. The sort of breakdown of the boundary, for example, that's being produced by modern science isn't likely to be benign for animals. And as Joy Williams remarks, the likely upshot is that, she says, we won't have to feel guilty about the suffering and degradation of the animals because we will have made them up. The victory of culture at last. On the other side, the development of the headless baby grown for organ parts and of human cloning should remind us of the other side of the paradox of human-animal kinship that underlies the animal research industry, of how it could soon be for us too. So instead of insisting, I think, that I want to delineate a different route here. Again, insisting that no being that is morally considerable can ever be food, a move, I think, that leads us inevitably towards moral dualism, neo-Cartesianism, and that food is inevitably a site of domination. I would say instead that we need to acknowledge that there is a distinction between being food and being meat. Meat is a reductionistic commodity, culturally specific category. No being should be taken to be meat, in my opinion, but we are all food, and humans are as much food as animals. I think this is something that we've denied. I came to recognise that denial myself through an encounter I had in the Kakadu National Park in 1985 as food for a crocodile, which made me think very hard about this issue of being food for others as a human being. So the belief that only those that need consideration can be food, I think, is one reason why the factory farm treats those that we position as food as beyond and outside ethics, why we deny their kinship with us. When we can truly acknowledge our food as our kin, we will be unable to carry out these alienated kinds of practices. So instead of extending our illusory fantasy positioning of ourselves outside the food chain to other animals, we should reposition ourselves back in the food chain and start our project of recognising kinship from that position. This would be my solution to the problem of getting stuck halfway on that deconstruction process that I was describing. So I want to suggest this is part of a different approach to ethical eating, which replaces culturally universalised vegetarianism by a contextual vegetarianism, a positive view of predation as an aspect of embodiment, a view which neither glorifies and privileges the predator experience over the prey experience as distinctive of human life, in the way so many male hunting theorists do, nor reads predation as inevitably an expression of domination and masculinism in the way that some ecofeminists have done. So I think there's room to articulate something that goes between this standoff. That's what I'm saying about that. The nature-culture division must not be constructed as a dualism, nor remain the site of domination, but it does remain ethically salient. We should acknowledge that we stand with a foot in both camps, stress mutuality and the need to see from both sides of the divide. That's almost finished. That's a platform statement, but something I'm going to take up in more detail on Saturday morning. Well, to sum up then, I think there's been an over-focus on the issue of individual consumer strategies too in vegetarianism, and also on hunting, compared to these important issues of rationalist agriculture. And I think that this focus essentially emerges from the theoretical position I've been criticising. Environmental philosophy, I think, also has led to the attempt by philosophers to rationalise the area of food practice. The most tangible result of the discussion that I've seen so far is to show how deeply entrenched in this culture is our deep compulsion to impose rankings on the non-human world, to conceive food practices, as well as other practices by which we relate to non-humans, in terms of the inevitability of dualism and domination, and to throw out how difficult it is for us to throw off our background of Cartesianism and nature culture dualism. Well, I think that ecofeminism, if any position can surely help to change some of those things. So thanks very much.
conference is to highlight successful eco-feminist activism. I'm involved in an activist project that embodies for me several features of eco-feminist theory as I've been reading about it and modestly contributing to it as a theorist for the past 7 years or so. And I want to share my activist project with you in order to kick off the activist portion of this conference. And because I'm very proud of this project, I want to show off. I'm going to begin by talking about the facts of the project, and then I'm going to show you a few slides, some pretty pictures. And then I'm going to talk briefly about how I see the project as an eco-feminist one. So to begin with the facts, the project that I'm involved in is called PEAS, the Program in Ecological Agriculture and Society. I co-founded this university program along with Josh Slotnick, who is a local organic farmer and who is now the program's primary field instructor and farm manager. Students in PEAS can earn up to 12 credits working on a 4-acre organic vegetable farm on land owned by the university and by Missoula County, and by attending a lecture series that in the summer focuses on agricultural science, in the fall focuses on representations of agriculture in literature and the fine arts, and in the spring focuses on the social, economic, and moral issues in agriculture. The vast majority of our students' time is spent in the field under Josh's supervision, where they learn horticultural skills ranging from seed starting to composting to pruning to insect control, harvesting, cover crop, the whole gamut. In the process, they also learn various community building skills, including problem-solving skills, communication skills, consensus skills, as this group of 25 to 30 students shares and designates multiple responsibilities for the operation of a fair-sized organic farm. Currently, there are about a dozen programs similar to PEAS at other universities in the country, but PEAS is unique in the following 3 respects. First, we're the only cold climate program in the country, and that means that we're faced with and serve as a test site for solving the challenges of an unusually short growing season. We're just now into the greenhouse, for example. 2, we're the only program in which students work side by side with various populations from the greater community. These populations include Hmong and Russian immigrants, retirees, nonviolent offenders performing court-ordered community service, the mentally ill, group home youngsters, and in particular state aid recipients. And 3, we're quite proud of the following. Montana is an economically depressed state. In Missoula, which is a relatively affluent Montana community, 1 in 5 people live at or below the poverty level. 11% of adults in our community worry that their households will run out of food each month. And only 22% of our county residents eat a high-quality diet of 5 servings of fresh food a day. And our project addresses very self-consciously and directly these issues. That is, over 50% of our harvest goes directly to low-income Missoulians, primarily through the food bank. And we're talking here about a significant amount of food. During our first year of operation, which was last year, during our peak month, which is August, we sent over 600 pounds of produce to the food bank each week. And every leaf and potato, I'm proud to say, was claimed and consumed. And production's going up. We're doubling the acreage this year. And the soils will be better this year, so we're going to be producing quite a bit of food this year that we'll send out of the food bank. PEAS, the university program, operates in conjunction with the Garden City Harvest Project, a collaborative of 24 community organizations, which include the County Health Department, the WIC program, the food bank, the Mormon Bishop Cannery, and many others. Among other things, the Garden City harvest workers see to it that the food Peas grows gets into the hands of those who have the least access to fresh organic produce, into the hands of low-income Missoulians, the majority of whom are women and their kids. The Garden City Harvest Project also sponsors a countywide gleaning program. That is, we send volunteers into private gardens to glean produce that private gardeners can't use and want to donate to our project. We have too many tomatoes. I can't imagine that I have too many tomatoes. Would your project like to have them? Would the cannery like to have them? And we go in and snag them. They also sponsor a grow-a-row program, which encourages private gardeners to grow a row of anything edible for the food bank. And the Garden City Harvest Project also coordinates 3 community gardens in low-income Missoula neighborhoods. The residents of those neighborhoods run those gardens, and they eat most of the food that comes out of those gardens, and they also donate a 5th of what they grow in each of those gardens to the food bank. The project also oversees the rattlesnake garden, which is just a little direction of that name. I know I think there's 7 things I still wrote. Yeah, it's that way. And the residents of the rattlesnake grow produce in that garden, and all of that produce goes to the food bank. A mere 25 years ago, 90% rather of the valley's food was grown right here in Missoula, and we were once referred to as the Garden City. Now, 90% of our food is shipped in from out of state at great cost to the environment, and ultimately it's great cost to the poor. Peas and Garden City Harvest hope to change that. We hope once again to make the valley more produce self-sufficient. We're getting somewhere with it. Our programs are just beginning their 2nd year. We're operating on a $250,000 grant in community agriculture that we received from the USDA last year. We were one of 13 communities in the country to receive this grant out of a pool of 1,500 applicants. We also received generous support from the university, from our president and from our dean, support from local businesses, and from a large number of generous private citizens. And I want to thank you all if you're out there. We've had a phenomenally successful first year. Our Peas courses were highly over-requested. We could double enrollment. I keep telling the president, think something like a double enrollment if we had more resources, more staff out at the farm. Garden City Harvest has received more offers of land and volunteer help than it can manage right now. The harvest was bountiful, thanks to the hard work of Josh and our truly exceptional students, and to the generosity of the land itself. So I'm going to show you some slides now of the garden primarily. Sometimes of the Missoula Valley from the south side of Mount Jumbo, which is the hill on the opposite side of the river, the opposite side of campus. And I think in the foreground, longtime Missoulians can correct me if I'm wrong, we're looking at the site of the old Hughes Garden, which was a 20-acre truck farm, essentially. And that farm supplied most of the supplied the valley with most of its produce, with apparently 90% of its produce, here 25 years ago. The farm was closed in the early 70s when the interstate went through. And as I said, Peas and Garden City Harvest is hoping to do what the Hughes Farm did 20 years ago. We're hoping to make the valley produce self-sufficient again, and soon. This is a seedling. It might be, I don't know if that's a pea or not. It's more like a green leafy green. Some of my students might be out there. Are there some of these students out there who can give me technical assistance? I don't know, it's a seedling. Maybe it's spinach or kale, I'm not sure. This is President George Dennison of the University of Montana busting sod at our groundbreaking ceremony, which took place at the farm at about this time last year. This is our cool greenhouse from the inside, and there's a student there working in the greenhouse. This greenhouse was built by volunteers from the Montana Conservation Corps. I'll show you their photographs later. And by Peace students. It's 1,400 square feet. It consists of, it's up to code. I promise it's up to code. It consists of steel posts that are sunk in concrete several feet in the ground according to code. Consists also of 2 layers of plastic that are separated from one another by a layer of air, and that keeps the plastic taut, and it keeps the plastic from tearing when there are winds. And you might notice the rather steep pitch on the greenhouse. This is so it can't support heavy snowfall without collapsing. A couple of winters ago, that was a problem for a lot of growers when we had a very, very heavy snow and greenhouses collapsed all over and up and down the valley. It won't happen. It won't happen to us. Shouldn't happen to us. This is seed, looks like seed starting, seed culling, or start culling. And these are some of our students. This is John Deere and Steve Elliott. Steve co-owns Lifeline Farms, an organic farm down in the Bitterroot Valley. Last year, Steve generously volunteered his time and a tractor to turn the soil for us. This is some homegrown compost from the Lifeline Dairy, also down in the Bitterroot. We applied several tons of this juicy stuff to our beds last year as we created beds. This is a student raking every last clod of compost out of the truck bed. Oh, actually, that's Bronwyn. This is Josh's assistant of last year, not a student. This is a student spreading compost to create a bed. This is a student remodeling a barn near the garden that we use for storage, meetings, and lunches in the summer. About to get kicked out of, actually. Students in Peace learn not only horticultural skills, but carpentry skills, some small engine repair. They operate some farm equipment, and they learn to set up and take down irrigation pipes, among other things. This is more seed starting. These are putting some starts in the ground. Just watering the starts to seal them in. Here are some of our beds. This is a 2-acre site we're looking at. We're doubling the site this year, as I said before. Oh, there's the osprey nest way back. The deer fence is up, as you see, and the beds are made. Over 100 of them are in this 2-acre site. And remay, which is an insulator, is over the starts. This is probably over some greens and peas, I guess. This is early May of last year. This is the peas trellis. This is early May. And here come the peas. This is our mascot crop. This is something of an early harvest, but you see the peas are growing up that trellis. The storms coming in. This is early June. Oh, here are peas. Here, you see the pea pods, they made it. This is mid-season July, and you're looking at, I don't know what all that stuff is, I can't recognize it, slides, but among other things, you see some flowers that we planted to attract beneficial insects. This is an aerial shot of the farm in August, our peak month. This is 2 acres. This is late summer, and we're beginning to plant, and you can see it on the far right, a cover crop in some of the beds. We planted, and I think that's what you're looking at on the right, next to the chart maybe, buckwheat. The buckwheat will get so high, I have a shot of it in a later slide, and then in early fall we turn it in, and the organic matter improves the organic composition of the soil, which was pretty poor at the beginning of the season. I see a soil scientist, or a plant scientist out there, Kathy Zabinski. She's on our board, she can help me if I make mistakes. And after we've turned the buckwheat in, we planted oats and rye, and the oats and rye will stay in for the duration of the summer. They'll die, but they'll prevent, having that crop in over the winter rather, will prevent erosion, keep moisture in, and we'll turn that in the spring. It's being turned in now, in fact, the oats and rye, and that too will improve the organic composition of the soils out there. Oh, there's Josh in the red shirt. Oh, there's me behind Josh. The blue shirt. No. Oh, and there's the president. Glasses on the left. And who else? That's Terry. He runs co-op. And there's our dean. There's our dean in the hat on the far right. Some of the other people are. This is the garden, and this is a little storage shed that the students built at the beginning of the season. These are our pumpkins. We grew several hundred of them, and most of them went to the food bank and to the county fund house at Halloween. This is our modest, so far, composting operation, I believe. We're composting currently organic materials from the garden and from lunches. This is the buckwheat, the first cover crop we put in. This must be later in the season. You can see some of the greens starting to bolt on the right. And there's the osprey nest again. Are any of the P students here? Curve students here? Are the osprey back here? Actually, you're next. This is a harvest. As I said, most of our harvest goes directly to the food bank as fresh produce, or it finds its way to the Mormon Bishop Cannery. They can it and send donated to the food bank to distribute over the winter. This is a good harvest, smart harvest. Potatoes and carrots, cucumbers. Let me go back a minute. Most of our harvest, as I said, goes directly to low-income folks, but we also sell what we call shares to families in Missoula who essentially come by the garden twice a week and pick up a variety of vegetables that are in season that week. And we sell low-income shares at a low cost to low-income families, and then higher-income shares to more affluent families. And what money we're able to make selling shares goes into to pay for our operating costs. Looks like Bill. These are our peas again. They're about 6-7 foot there, Leighton. These are some students and some volunteers carrying in the foreground. Next to one of the beds. This is a FAME worker working in the greenhouse. FAME is an acronym for Families Achieving Independence in Montana. She's a state aid recipient who is now required to perform some community service for her benefits in exchange for her benefits. We've been designated as a work site, and in addition to receiving her benefits, she takes food home with her at the end of the day, and she's learning, we hope, some marketable horticultural skills, and we're hoping to have even more FAME workers working alongside our students and other community members this summer. This is Josh again in the white t-shirt with Bill and some youth at risk from one of the group homes. These are members of the Montana Conservation Corps. As I said earlier, they did a tremendous amount of work with us last year as we were getting the infrastructure in place, greenhouse, fencing. This is Bill on the right and Joel on the left. Bill is now interning with Lifeline Dairy down in the Bitterroot, and I think plans to make a career out of dairy farming, organic dairy farming. Joel and another of our students started farms of their own this year. 3 of our other students are interning with organic farms elsewhere in the country and have decided to make a career out of organic farming. Another of our graduates has gone into the Peace Corps this year, and Diana over here, in the checkered blouse, is this year a Truman Scholarship national finalist, who, as a result of her peace experience, wants to work around international issues in agriculture. And I think we did pretty well by our first graduating class. Oh, these are some of our students at the market. One is wearing a head of lettuce, I see. Right. We are growing some cash crops, and as I said, we grow some crops, we'll sell some produce in the as shares. And we also sold some produce last year to the public schools for their lunch programs. And we're looking into the possibility of growing more cash crops beginning this year. We're particularly interested in growing some echinacea for market. We're growing cash crops again, I want to say, in order to cover our operating expenses. We're a nonprofit. We're not looking to make a profit out of the crops that we're selling, and we do not and will not compete in any way with local organic farmers who market in the area. To that. This is a backward shot of the North Side Community Garden. This is the garden that is in the one of the low-income neighborhoods here in Missoula that the Garden City Harvest Project and the MUD project, the Missoula Urban Development Project runs. This is another shot of the North Side Garden. This is wheelchair gardening at the North Side Garden. This is a mom and her kids at the River Road Garden site. This is another Garden City Harvest site located in a low-income neighborhood. This is an elder and a young person at the River Road. Oh, that looks like the North Side site. That's the North Side site. I think a good example of this particular shot of the community building that's happening within these neighborhoods as community residents leave their homes, gather, meet one another, and work side by side in these community gardens as well as out east side. This is one of our students of last year. She's a waterer. Two students were assigned watering chores for a week's period. Throughout the summer, they rotated, and it's a hard job, a messy job, and she's doing a good job there. Giving us some. That's my last shot. Wow. Say three things about how I see this project as an eco-feminist one. Number one, I think the single most obvious way in which Peas and Garden City Harvest are eco-feminist projects is in our two-pronged focus. Our environmental focus and our social justice focus, and I'll say a bit about each of these. A bit about our environmental focus. We are committed to an organic operation, and that means two things. It means we're sensitive to the biological integrity of the soils, plants, insects, and other organisms that constitute the garden biotic community. And it means we want to work in partnership with that biotic community. And we wish to work in partnership with that community for practical reasons, that is, we want to grow healthy food in a sustainable way, and for moral reasons. We respect the natural integrity of that biotic community that we're in partnership with. So to cite a very famous essay that those of you read in eco-feminist literature will recognize, the project is anti-naturist. That essay is by Karen Warren. I think I recognize her out there. A bit about the social justice focus of our project. We're committed to growing food for and with underserved communities. That is, for and with low-income communities, migrant communities, for and with women and children on various forms of state assistance. So the program is acting against sexism, racism, classism, among other things. And I want to say that we are hyper aware of the overlap between the two prongs of our mission. We're hyper aware of the overlap between the environmental and the social justice issues in agriculture, and we emphasize this overlap in our lecture series and in the field. The second thing I want to say about how it is this project is eco-feminist is the following. And I'm drawing from Karen Warren's famous essay once again. The project is inclusivist and is community-oriented. In so much as diverse populations work side by side on the farm, making decisions about operations, sharing skills and recipes, sharing life stories and values as they pick beans and build compost piles and spend evenings watering together and shovel poop. and in the summer as they make and take meals together. These populations are honoring and acknowledging differences as they work, and commonalities, as they work towards some shared environmental and social goals. And this experience is empowering for all involved in all sorts of ways. One of Josh's favorite stories is about how early last semester, in our first class, students, a group of women students were looking rather fearfully at some hand saws, but within a half an hour, Josh and Bronwyn had them using those saws, learning those carpentry skills and exploring the fascinating world of drill bits and other carpentry equipment. It's empowering for the kids from group homes, for example, who last year were, among other things, given significant responsibility for a potato harvest and followed through with it. It's empowering for the WIC moms who are learning how to prepare fresh green leafies for their families versus opening a can of inferior quality food at dinner time. And some of those WIC moms are also learning, we hope, marketable horticultural skills with us. The third thing and final thing I want to say about how it is these projects are eco-feminist is this. The social and environmental context at the farm promotes certain values that have been identified by some writers, Karen among them, as central to an eco-feminist ethic and as undervalued in more traditional ethical literature. These values include care, friendship, trust, and reciprocity. I hope it's clear from what I've said so far how these values are integral to the social operation of the farm. Care, friendship, trust, and reciprocity. Those of you who have practiced organic gardening at home know what it is to extend these values to the land as well as an organic gardener. You know what it is to give care to, that is a certain sort of studied, patient, and self-other balanced attention to, say, a tomato plant that you remember was once this little tiny seed in your greenhouse, and it's in March and is now this fall in August and is producing tomatoes this big. It's pretty damn big for Missoula.
Right before the freeze.
Right before the freeze, yeah. And they're ripe too. Right before the freeze. Well, we're appreciative even of the green ones here in Missoula. What it is to give care to that tomato plant. You know what it is to consider a friend, the ladybug or the praying mantis, the beneficial insect that you find under the bean leaf, eating those bean larvae. We don't have bean beetles here, but in the southeast, I'd love to see those ladybugs eating those little larvae. You will appreciate how you might agonize over certain trust issues when the slugs get hold of your baby lettuce, or when the cutworms start to take down your baby and precious basil plants. You've got to do something about it. And you might appreciate how good it feels to reciprocate by throwing a heavy load of compost on a bed, or to put in a cover crop in late September. So this is my eco-feminist baby, and I want to thank you all for letting me share it with you. Sometime I'm happy to answer questions about how you might start your own peace program on your campus or in your city. And I'm happy to take those of you who are interested on a farm tour sometime over the weekend. I have flyers up here on the Garden City Harvest Project and on the peace program. And thank you for your patient attention.
Unfortunately, I do not speak English well enough to express to you the ideas about ecofeminism that I've had since the foundation of the movement with the publication of my book in 1978, Feminism, Ecology, Revolution, and Mutation.
Je me présente, je suis écrivain. J'ai écrit une cinquantaine d'ouvrages divers, des biographies, des romans, des essais, et une partie importante de cette œuvre, dont certains titres ont été traduits en 15 langues étrangères, a pris pour objet l'obsession, je peux dire de toujours, le féminisme.
Oui. Cours, s'il te plaît. Tu peux répéter?
J'ai été écrivain depuis toujours.
I've been a writer since the beginning but I've written over 50 books, and I'm here to talk about ecofeminism.
Avant l'écoféminisme, c'est le féminisme qui me mobilisait.
Before ecofeminism, it was feminism that mobilized me.
Bien avant que je découvre les problèmes écologiques et ensuite la liaison indispensable entre les deux.
Much before I discovered ecology and the strict links that are found between ecology and feminism.
Et voici comment cela s'est passé.
And here's how it happened.
À partir de 1978, j'ai fondé ce qui fut considéré comme une branche du féminisme,
As early as 1978, I founded what has been considered as a branch of feminism,
à savoir le mouvement de l'écologie féminisme qui était indispensable au moment où les problèmes écologiques explosaient en Europe et particulièrement en France.
known as ecofeminism, which was indispensable, especially at the time when ecological problems were exploding in the world and especially in France.
Et je dois dire qu'en 1974, donc 4 ans avant cette explosion,
That in 1974, 4 years before this explosion,
j'avais participé à un congrès sur la démographie à Bucarest, à une époque qui était encore sous le règne du sinistre Ceausescu.
I participated in a congress in Bucharest on population during the time that it was under the sinister reign of
Ceausescu.
Siskiyou.
Tout le monde sait qui il est.
Everyone knows who he is.
Mais déjà, avant d'écrire donc mon livre, j'avais résumé l'essentiel des découvertes qui lient l'écologie au féminisme.
So already before writing my book, I had put together the essential ideas that linked ecology and feminism
Sur des tracts que j'ai distribués dans les tables, on appelait cela les tables rondes parallèles,
on flyers that I distributed to tables that were called parallel tables,
c'est-à-dire les rencontres entre participants en dehors de la tribune et de la discussion officielle.
meaning that it was meetings that were taking place for the participants outside of the conference.
Ce qui, je dois le dire, a soulevé un véritable tollé. La façon dont ces tracts ont été reçus, c'est tout juste si je ne me suis pas fait expulser.
I almost got myself kicked out by the way that I spread these flyers all around.
Et le journal écologique qui s'appelait La Gueule ouverte,
The ecological newspaper, which was called
à Paris,
The Open Mouth in Paris,
a publié un dessin fort drôle de moi en caricature à la tribune avec la salle horrifiée qui disait « Elle n'a pas l'esprit de l'ONU ».
with a caricature of her at the Congress saying, I don't have the mind of the United Nations. I do not agree with the United Nations.
Et je dois dire qu'après les premières manifestations et activités du mouvement naissant écologique
And I
féministe,
have to say that after these first demonstrations that took place at the birth of ecofeminism,
le mouvement est totalement retombé en France,
the movement has completely gone away in France,
alors qu'à l'étranger, de plus en plus, et dans les années suivantes,
as
il a essaimé, il a donné des groupes, des mouvements, des colloques, qui n'étaient même pas connus en France, alors que c'était de là que le mouvement partait.
whereas it has been seeded all around the world in different places by people who have not even been known at all in France, which is the place from where it came,
Tout particulièrement,
especially
l'écho qui a été provoqué par l'apparition de l'écoféminisme a retenti d'abord au Mexique.
especially the echo that was heard about ecofeminism in the country of Mexico.
Ensuite, il y a eu au Canada, où j'ai été invité en 1981, eu un écho extrêmement favorable, suivi de fondation de groupes écoféministes au Canada.
And it was followed by echoes in Canada with my trip in 1981 to a conference in Montreal on ecofeminism, which met with a great success, and was followed by the foundation of ecofeminist organizations in Canada.
Ensuite, j'ai eu la satisfaction d'apprendre qu'en Australie, non seulement le mouvement écoféministe existait, mais qu'il avait envoyé des délégués à son gouvernement.
after that, I had the pleasure of learning that in Australia, not only were there ecofeminists, but the ecofeminist movement was represented to the Australian government.
Ce qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, c'est pour moi comme une grande revanche
Which is big revenge for me
d'être ici, pour une fois, depuis le temps que j'ai existé en tant que fondatrice du mouvement écoféministe, enfin d'être reconnue officiellement à ce sujet.
to be here with you and to finally be recognized as the founder of this movement.
Alors pourquoi cette formulation? Pourquoi cette idée d'une union entre deux mouvements qui déjà existaient mais qui semblaient appelés à des destins différents?
So why this movement? Why this formulation between, why this link between these two movements that,
D'une part l'écologie, de l'autre le féminisme.
from one side ecology, from the other side feminism?
Eh bien, cela découle d'une découverte que j'ai faite sur le plan historique en apprenant certains détails de l'évolution du passé et de la civilisation qui est la nôtre.
It has to do with certain discoveries that I made, historical discoveries concerning the past of the culture which is ours.
Cette découverte a été celle des deux fondements du patriarcat,
These discoveries were the two foundation marks of patriarchy,
qui sont toutes les deux les origines des deux problèmes écologiques les plus brûlants d'aujourd'hui.
which are both of them still today the most burning problems of ecofeminism.
Voici de quoi il s'agit.
This is what it's about.
Les théoriciens du siècle passé, du 19e siècle,
The theoreticians from the past century, from the 19th century,
s'accordent pratiquement tous
are almost all in agreement
pour reconnaître que l'agriculture, qui était le seul moyen de création de richesse de l'Antiquité, appartenait aux femmes, à leurs pratiques et uniquement à elles.
recognize that agriculture and the practices involved with it were related to women, and everything that had to do with agriculture was related with women.
Et que quand l'agriculture féminine à la houe, c'est-à-dire à un petit instrument qui n'est pas encore la charrue, quand cette agriculture-là a été entre les mains des hommes qui ont inventé le socle de la charrue, la charrue,
So when this feminine agriculture was taken over by men with their invention of the plow,
cette découverte de la maîtrise de l'agriculture
this discovery of the mastery of nature
par les hommes
by men
a été appelée la grande défaite des femmes.
was called the great defeat of the women.
Et cette découverte a été le départ d'un essor extrêmement rapide et d'une extension de la civilisation naissante.
And this discovery was what led to the coming out of this.
Il s'en est suivi une augmentation de la population,
It's followed by the increase in population.
mais la deuxième découverte du patriarcat
The second discovery of patriarchy
n'a pas encore été tellement étudiée par ceux qui reconnaissaient cette mainmise sur l'agriculture.
has not really been studied very much by those who have recognized the fact of this laying on, this taking over of agriculture.
Cette découverte, la voici, c'est celle de la paternité.
This discovery is that of paternity,
Car encore aujourd'hui,
because still today,
dans certains sous-groupes éloignés de ce qu'on appelle la civilisation,
in certain faraway subgroups of what we call civilization,
les missionnaires sont étonnés de reconnaître que les indigènes admettent difficilement que l'enfant soit le fils d'un homme.
Missionaries were surprised to discover that indigenous peoples had a difficult time admitting that children came from men.
Le mythe persiste dans ces endroits de la femme fécondée par une divinité et non pas par l'homme.
The myth persists in these areas of women inseminated by divine characters and not by men.
Alors qu'en Europe, au moment de la fin, environ de la fin du néolithique,
Whereas in Europe, around the end of the Neolithic age,
apparaît le pastorat, c'est-à-dire l'élevage des animaux,
the raising of animals appears,
et les hommes qui jusque-là les chassaient pour les manger n'avaient pas eu le temps de les observer.
and the men who had up until then been hunting them had not had enough time to observe the animals,
Et découvrent à ce moment-là que chez les animaux, cela a l'air de se passer vraiment comme ça se passe chez eux.
and discover when they're raising them that the reproduction of the animals has to do with the same functions as the reproduction of themselves.
Ce qui fait qu'à la mainmise sur l'agriculture s'ajoute la mainmise sur la fécondité des animaux et évidemment des femmes.
So with the takeover of agriculture by men, we have obviously the takeover of breeding of animals and obviously of the breeding of women.
Cela fonde le patriarcat en tant que tel,
This is the foundation of patriarchy.
même si avant cette époque, il n'existait pas exactement ce que Bachhofen a appelé un matriarcat,
Even if before this time there existed what Bachhofen calls the matriarchy,
mais une culture agricole où la femme avait un grand prestige et comme mère et comme cultivatrice.
but it was a society where the woman had a great prestige as mother and as farmer.
Donc, les femmes mises en subordination par
Thus, women placed under subordination
les hommes devenus maîtres de la fécondité et de la fertilité,
by men who have become the masters of fertility and of breeding,
sont condamnées à une position subalterne
are condemned to a subalternate position,
qui ne manque pas de devenir un véritable esclavage.
which will not lack in becoming a true enslavement.
Or, avec l'évolution de la civilisation et le passage du temps,
With the evolution of civilization and the passage of time,
cette condition va évidemment évoluer jusqu'à l'époque moderne,
this condition will, of course, evolve until our modern days,
mais continue à être largement infériorisée par rapport au statut du sexe premier masculin.
but continues to be greatly inferiorized in relation to the masculine sex.
Et ces deux maîtrises de la fertilité et de la fécondité
These two masteries of fertility and of breeding
entraînent un progrès tout d'abord extrêmement rapide, foudroyant,
carry with them first, tout d'abord,
premièrement,
first, wait,
oui, foudroyant, extraordinaire,
extraordinary and
mais
expansion.
cette extraordinaire expansion et de la population humaine et de la culture
But this extraordinary expansion, both of human population and of culture,
aboutit à l'époque moderne où les problèmes écologiques vont se poser d'une manière extrêmement grave.
ends with our modern times when ecological problems start to be posed in an extremely grave nature.
Les deux menaces les plus importantes de l'époque moderne
The two most important threats of our modern times
est d'une part la surpopulation
is, on the one hand, overpopulation,
et d'autre part la destruction des sols et l'épuisement des ressources.
And on the other hand, the destruction of the land and the exhaustion of natural resources.
Et nous voyons donc que les deux découvertes fondamentales du patriarcat
We see thus that the two primary foundations of patriarchy
aboutissent après une prospérité et un succès incroyable,
and after an unbelievable prosperity and success,
à une menace qui limite et finalement aboutirait à la destruction même de l'espèce humaine.
to a threat which ends in principle with the destruction of the human species.
Donc, on voit le lien étroit qui existe,
So we see the link,
le lien étroit
the tight, the straight link, the connection
qui existe entre le féminisme ou la lutte pour la libération des femmes
which exists between feminism or the fight for the liberation of women
et le combat absolument obligatoire, pas seulement légitime, mais obligatoire pour l'écologie qui veut rendre à la terre et à la nature les droits dont on a privé.
and the absolutely obligatory way of looking at nature which we are depriving of its rights.
Donc, l'écologie-féminisme est une union non pas artificielle, mais absolument logique et naturelle.
Thus, the concept of ecofeminism is not artificial,
Mais absolument obligatoire,
But-
logique et naturelle.
but logical, natural, and it must be made.
Et j'en veux
Necessary.
et je n'en veux pour preuve que cette constatation, la démographie dépend entièrement de la libération des femmes redevenues maîtresses de leur procréation.
Population rests entirely on women who need
Redevenues propriétaires de leur propre
who have
corps
become the owners of their own bodies
et de la procréation du nombre d'enfants qu'elles mettent tout au monde.
and of the procreation of the number of children that they put into the world.
C'est à partir du moment où les femmes ont eu plus d'enfants qu'elles n'en voulaient
It's from the time when women had more children than they actually wanted to
que le problème démographique a commencé à se poser
that the overpopulation problem began to pose itself,
et qu'il menace de ce qu'on a surnommé la bombe P, c'est-à-dire la population devenue si inflationnelle que cela équivaut à une bombe menaçant l'humanité.
that we start calling it the population bomb, which means that our population is so threatened by explosion that it's like a bomb that threatens us.
Mais il est certain que la lutte écoféministe ne s'arrête pas à cette question déjà si importante de l'inflation démographique.
But it is certain that the ecofeminist fight does not end here with these questions,
Car la deuxième menace, qui est celle de l'épuisement des sols et de la destruction des ressources,
because the second threat, which is that of the exhaustion of the land and the destruction of resources,
concerne aussi, en tout premier lieu, concerne aussi principalement
and in the first place concerns also
les femmes qui sont reproductrices de la vie
women who are the reproductors of life
et qui préparent les générations futures.
and who bring the next generation and who prepare them for their lives.
Et si l'on me dit que les hommes aussi, bien entendu, préparent ces générations,
And if you tell me that men also, of course, help prepare their children for life,
je répondrai que l'on peut constater de leur part une complète indifférence à ce qui menace la génération à venir.
I could say that they have a complete indifference to the problems which face the generations to come.
Les détenteurs du pouvoir n'hésitent pas à détruire les sols et les ressources pour une question de profit.
The holders of power don't hesitate to destroy the land and deplete resources for questions of profit.
Et à recourir à l'énergie nucléaire comme une énergie pas seulement principale, mais unique.
And to fall back on nuclear energy is not only a necessary energy, but a unique energy.
Alors qu'elle est basée sur un matériau, l'uranium, qui est en voie d'extinction.
Whereas it is based on uranium, which is a material that is in depletion.
Et que cette industrie menace à différents niveaux l'humanité par non seulement des accidents comme Tchernobyl, mais de maladies encore difficiles à contrôler, qui seraient le résultat de la radioactivité dans le monde.
And then, this is a threat with radioactivity, with things like Chernobyl going on all over the world.
Ces différentes constatations montrent bien à quel point le monde a besoin d'une écologie féministe qui le renouvelle à la base et en profondeur.
These different conclusions show us how ecofeminism is needed to look at these problems, to examine them in depth.
Car il est impensable de continuer de cette manière.
It is unthinkable to continue in this manner
sans aboutir à une catastrophe
without coming upon a catastrophe
qui ne serait même pas, comme on le craignait autrefois, une guerre nucléaire,
which would not even be like we used to fear, a nuclear war,
mais simplement l'emploi absolument fou, absolument extravagant,
but the absolutely crazy use
d'une énergie qui ne pourrait être remplacée, non pas par une autre,
of an energy which could be replaced by another one,
mais par
not by another one,
mais par une énumération d'autres énergies dites douces,
but by many other ones, by energies which are called soft,
qui seraient parfaitement compatibles avec une évolution de la civilisation et non pas sa destruction.
which would be completely compatible with an evolution of civilization and not with its destruction.
Donc aujourd'hui, le féminisme, c'est beaucoup plus que le féminisme.
Thus, today, feminism is much more than feminism,
Car il ne s'agit plus seulement d'une revendication légitime d'une catégorie d'humanité opprimée par l'autre catégorie,
because it's not only now
protestation,
the protest against for women that have been taken over,
mais par la remise en fonction des valeurs qui sont les valeurs du féminin et que le patriarcat a voulu abolir et écraser pour des raisons de pouvoir et de profit.
but bringing back values which are feminine values, which the patriarchy wanted to destroy for reasons of profit and power.
Avec l'écologie féminisme,
With ecofeminism,
nous pouvons envisager un type de société complètement différent du nôtre
we can envision a type of society completely different from our own,
et qui devient de plus en plus urgente à édifier
and which is becoming more and more urgent to bring into being
au moment où les meilleurs analystes sont en train de nous présenter comme perspective du XXIe siècle la disparition du travail salarié.
as theorists are now talking to us about the imminent disappearance of salaried work,
Ce qui évidemment entraîne des conséquences ultra, non seulement rapides, mais ultra graves et importantes,
which brings with it consequences which are not only which are grave and important.
des problèmes écologiques présents dont je viens de vous faire un rapide tableau.
It also brings with it the present ecological problems, of which I have just given you a brief picture.
C'est pour cela que maintenant que je vous ai exposé très brièvement ces différentes constatations,
This is why, after having given you very briefly some of these conclusions,
je vais vous passer la parole pour que vous me posiez des questions, vous entamiez une discussion, afin que ce que je viens de dire ne reste pas simplement un exposé parmi d'autres, mais qu'une
pass the word over to you so that you can ask me some questions so that it can become a discussion and not just a talk by one person.
mais qu'il puisse entraîner une prise de conscience et une réflexion qui pourrait être la base d'une action militante.
So that it can bring about militant action.
J'attends les questions.
I'm waiting for your questions.
I don't want to deny the notion of overpopulation, but still, don't you think there is a woman-blaming attitude concealed in that concept? We hear overpopulation, we hear population control. Is there another way we can express overpopulation without
Le concept de la surpopulation
The concept of overpopulation
n'a rien, au contraire, d'un blâme implicite concernant les femmes.
carries with it, on the contrary, no blame towards women.
Car ce phénomène de la surpopulation
Because this phenomenon of overpopulation
est la preuve éclatante de la subordination des femmes,
is
pour ne pas dire esclavage,
the proof of the subordination of women, for not saying slavery.
et j'en veux pour preuve que c'est dans les pays favorisés, industrialisés,
And as proof of this, I offer that in industrialized countries,
où les femmes se libèrent peu à peu
where
des chaînes traditionnelles,
women are liberating themselves little by little from their traditional chains,
que justement la courbe démographique baisse,
that as a matter of fact, the rate of population growth is going down,
et que c'est dans les régions où elle est le plus subordonnée
and it's in the regions where she is most subordinated
que la courbe de la démographie devient inflationnelle.
that population growth is skyrocketing. Je suis d'accord avec tout ça.
Alors, it's perfect.
And it's perfect.
Other question?
Oui, mais je vais parler en français.
Parfait. Je vous écoute.
Musa will speak in French.
Vous m'excusez, mais j'ai l'impression en fait que les écoféministes restent dans le désert, dans une certaine mesure. Parce que comme vous venez de dire, en fait, la démographie, si on parle de démographie galopante, c'est dans les pays sous-développés. Alors
Musa is saying that when we're talking about overpopulation, we're talking about it in developing countries usually.
et alors qu'en fait, c'est dans ces pays sous-développés que, par rapport à la vision du féminisme, c'est dans ces pays sous-développés que les femmes sont considérées comme exploitées.
Whereas in these countries that are underdeveloped, it's where women are considered as being exploited.
Et c'est dans ces pays sous-développés qu'on fait le braconnage, et c'est fait par les pays développés.
And it's in these braconnage. And it's in these countries where these underdeveloped countries where
Poaching is more
poaching is more prevalent,
et donc où la dégradation,
and the degradation.
La NASA, quand elle fait ce développement, c'est à tout loin des États-Unis.
And when NASA does their studies, it's far away from the United States.
J'ai très souvent eu affaire à cette objection qui est en partie très juste.
Many people, he's not done. She's heard this before. But he's not done.
Mais je dois dire qu'à l'heure actuelle,
But I have to say that right now,
la question de l'inflation démographique
the question of population growth
ne peut pas être réduite aux régions même très surpeuplées
cannot be reduced to just regions which are maybe even very overpopulated of the third world,
car actuellement,
because
ce
right now
problème est planétaire.
this problem is planetary.
Et quelle que soit la différence, en effet scandaleuse, de la répartition des biens entre les pays industrialisés et les autres,
And whatever the scandalous difference between the repartition of goods between underdeveloped and overdeveloped countries,
le fait de l'augmentation globale de la population
the fact of global overpopulation
pose un problème qui concerne la Terre entière
poses a problem which concerns the entire Earth
et qui ne peut pas être réduit par les procédés, les remèdes
and which
qui jusqu'ici ont été envisagés.
and which cannot be reduced to remedies which heretofore have been envisioned,
Et que par exemple, même avec une meilleure répartition des biens terrestres,
and even with a better repartitioning of earthly goods,
et avec la mise en valeur de terres encore, il n'y en a plus beaucoup, mais de terres encore exploitables,
and placing value on land that is still exploitable,
il n'empêcherait que dans un monde où l'humanité, ça n'empêcherait pas que dans un monde
we couldn't stop in a world where
où l'humanité, entre 1956
humanity between 1906
et 1966, en 10 ans,
56 and 66,
s'est augmenté du chiffre qu'il a représenté tout entière au XVIIe siècle.
the population growth represented that of the entire 17th century.
Et une telle constatation montre qu'il est impossible de ramener le problème de la surpopulation à la région du tiers. Et une telle constatation
And
prouve
such a conclusion proves
qu'il est impossible de ramener le problème
that it is impossible to bring the problem back
aux régions pauvres
to the poor regions
et d'ailleurs appauvries par les régions riches,
and impoverished by the rich regions,
qui ne sont qu'une partie de ce problème et non pas la totalité.
it's only one part of the problem and not the whole.
Comment? Je suis bien votre avis.
J'ai aussi une question.
Yes.
Je n'ai pas compris la fin de votre question sur les analystes qui prévoient la suppression du travail employé et les problèmes écologiques. Je n'ai pas compris le lien.
The question is about the link between the end of salaried work and environmental issues.
Alors, je vais vous répondre en 3 minutes parce que nous arrivons bientôt à la fin.
I'm just going to respond in 3 minutes.
C'est que, à l'heure actuelle,
At the current time,
la disparition de ce qui est le centre même de notre société où que nous soyons,
the disappearance of what is right at the very center of our civilization,
à savoir la justification de son existence
the justification of one's existence
par la vente de sa force de travail,
by the selling of one's work
Ah,
of one's labor.
cette disparition engendrera pour demain
This disappearance will engender for tomorrow's generation
des problèmes qui obligatoirement
problems which will obligatorily
concernant la production des biens qui doit toujours être mis sur le marché à partir du moment où le travail disparaît,
concerning the goods which are put on the market as soon as the work disappears
va poser des problèmes insolubles,
are going to prove unsolvable problems,
à
or
moins,
very difficult to solve problems,
à moins que nous soyons passés à un autre type de société
unless we pass into a different kind of society,
qui ne pourrait être que écologique et féministe.
which could only be ecological and feminist.
Voilà ce que j'avais à vous répondre.
That's what I had to answer.
Et maintenant, je crois que nous allons devoir nous séparer malgré le plaisir que j'ai à parler avec vous.
And unfortunately now I will have to separate ourselves despite the pleasure that I've had speaking with you.